Sometimes a woman does not need a miracle. She just needs one powerful man to say, she is not alone anymore. Claire Hartwell stared at the small pharmacy screen as the words insufficient funds flashed in angry red letters beneath her total. Her throat tightened instantly. Behind her, the line shifted with impatient sighs and rustling winter coats. Outside, freezing rain hammered against the windows of the 24-hour pharmacy on Lexington Avenue. The cashier glanced up with visible sympathy. I am sorry, ma'am. Your card was declined again. Claire swallowed hard and looked down at the items on the counter. Prenatal medication. Generic crackers. A heating pad. Everything her doctor had warned her not to skip after the bleeding scare 2 nights earlier. Her trembling hand moved protectively over the curve of her 7-month pregnant stomach, beneath her worn beige coat. Can you try it one more time? She asked softly. The cashier nodded and inserted the card again. Claire closed her eyes for one desperate second. Please. Not tonight. The machine beeped again. Declined. Heat crawled into her cheeks. She could already feel the stares from the people waiting behind her. A teenage girl in designer boots whispered something to her boyfriend. An older man checked his watch dramatically. Claire quickly reached for the medication. I can put something back. You are still short $18.40, the cashier explained gently. $18. Claire almost laughed at the cruelty of it. 2 years ago she had planned luxury weddings for Manhattan socialites who spent $18,000 on flowers without blinking. Now she could not afford medication to keep herself and her baby healthy. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter as a sudden wave of dizziness hit her. The baby shifted hard beneath her ribs. Easy, sweetheart, she whispered under her breath. Mom is trying. A deep male voice spoke behind her. Calm. Controlled. Add it to my purchase. Claire froze. The entire line went quiet. Slowly she turned around. The man standing behind her looked like he belonged on the cover of Forbes magazine. Tall. Broad shoulders beneath a charcoal overcoat tailored to perfection. Dark hair touched lightly with silver near the temples. Cold blue eyes sharp enough to silence a room without effort. Adrian Ashford. Even exhausted and half sick, Claire recognized him immediately. Everyone in New York recognized him. Billionaire CEO of Ashford Global. 42 years old. Ruthless in business. Untouchable in public. The cashier blinked nervously. Sir, it is not much, but I heard the amount. Adrian removed a black card from his wallet without taking his eyes off Claire. Pay for everything. Claire's stomach dropped. Embarrassment hit harder than hunger ever could. No, she said quickly. That is not necessary. Adrian looked at her for the first time fully then. Not at her worn coat. Not at the frayed canvas bag hanging from her shoulder. At her face. Tired eyes. Pale skin. Exhaustion carefully hidden beneath dignity. Something unreadable flickered across his expression. You need the medication, he said simply. Take it. Claire hated that her eyes burned instantly. She had spent months surviving alone without asking anyone for help. Especially men. Especially rich men who looked at struggling women like temporary inconveniences. I can manage, she whispered. Adrian slid the card across the counter anyway. Clearly, you should not have to tonight. The cashier processed the payment quickly. Claire stared down at the counter, humiliated by how close she was to crying in public. Thank you, she managed quietly. Adrian gave a single nod. Nothing more. No smug smile. No flirtation. No expectation. That almost made it worse. Claire grabbed the paper bag tightly and turned toward the exit before her emotions betrayed her completely. The cold rain slapped against her face the moment she stepped outside. She moved quickly beneath the flickering pharmacy sign, pulling her coat tighter around herself. Her apartment was 9 blocks away. The subway station smelled like smoke and urine after midnight, but walking in this weather with swollen ankles felt impossible. Suddenly headlights swept across the curb beside her. A sleek black SUV stopped inches from the sidewalk. Claire stiffened immediately. The back passenger window lowered slowly. Adrian Ashford sat inside, one hand resting against the leather seat as rain streaked across the dark glass behind him. You should not be walking alone this late, he said. Claire took a cautious step backward. I am fine. His gaze dropped briefly toward her stomach before returning to her face. You are pregnant. It is 38 degrees outside. And you almost collapsed in the pharmacy. Pride rose instinctively inside her. I do not need charity. Adrian studied her silently for a moment. Then his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Good, he said quietly. Because I was offering concern. Before Claire could answer, another voice suddenly cut through the rain. Claire. Her blood turned cold instantly. A black sports car had just pulled up across the street. Tyler Morgan stepped out laughing beside a tall blonde woman wrapped in white fur. His laughter disappeared the second he recognized her. Claire's heart began pounding violently. Tyler's eyes dropped immediately to her stomach with visible disgust. You have got to be kidding me, he muttered. The blonde beside him smirked openly. That is the ex-fiancé? Claire felt humiliation crash into her chest all over again. Not here. Not tonight. Tyler took a step closer through the rain. You are still pulling sympathy stunts? Claire instinctively wrapped both arms around her stomach. Adrian opened the SUV door slowly and stepped out into the rain beside her. The entire sidewalk seemed to shift the moment he straightened to his full height. Tyler froze. Recognition flashed across his face instantly. Adrian's voice remained calm. Ice cold. Is there a problem here? Tyler looked suddenly uncertain. Claire could barely breathe. Then Tyler laughed awkwardly. No problem. I just did not realize Claire had moved on so fast. The blonde woman looked Claire up and down cruelly. Poor thing probably finally found someone willing to pay the bills. Claire's face burned with shame. She wanted to disappear. Instead, she heard herself say the words before she could stop them. Please, she whispered, grabbing Adrian's sleeve with trembling fingers. Pretend you are my husband. Just for 1 minute. Silence crashed over the rain-soaked sidewalk. Tyler stared at her in disbelief. The blonde woman blinked. Claire's pulse thundered painfully in her ears as she realized what she had just done. Slowly, Adrian looked down at her hand clutching his coat. Then at her frightened face. Then at the trembling way she stood protecting her unborn child like she expected the world to hurt her again. And something in his expression changed completely. The rain dripped steadily from Adrian Ashford's dark overcoat as he looked down at Claire's trembling hand clutching his sleeve. For one suspended moment, nobody on the sidewalk moved. Traffic hissed through wet Manhattan streets behind them. Neon lights reflected across puddles at their feet. Tyler Morgan gave a short, disbelieving laugh first. Come on, he scoffed. You cannot seriously expect anyone to buy this. Claire felt humiliation burn through every inch of her body. The cold suddenly felt unbearable against her skin. She should not have said it. She should have walked away. But seeing Tyler again after 4 months had cracked open every wound she had spent sleepless nights trying to survive. Adrian's gaze never left her face. He noticed the panic behind her eyes. The instinctive way she stood slightly in front of her stomach, as if shielding the baby from invisible danger. Then his attention shifted toward Tyler. Calm. Measuring. Dangerous in a way that did not require raised voices. Actually, Adrian said quietly, I do expect that. Tyler's smirk faltered immediately. The blonde beside him blinked in confusion. Adrian reached down without warning and gently removed the pharmacy bag from Claire's freezing fingers. My wife should not be standing in the rain this long, he said. Claire's breath caught painfully in her throat. Wife. The word sounded impossibly real coming from him. Tyler stared between them. Since when? Adrian's expression did not change. That is not your concern. The blonde woman crossed her arms tightly. This is ridiculous. Everybody knows Claire Hartwell got dumped months ago. Claire flinched visibly. Adrian noticed. His jaw tightened slightly. Everybody, he replied evenly, should learn when to stop speaking. Silence crashed down again. Even Tyler looked uncomfortable now. Adrian Ashford was not simply rich. He was one of the most influential men in New York. One bad interaction with him could destroy careers before sunrise. Tyler forced another laugh anyway. Look man, whatever game this is, you do not have to save her. Claire always had a talent for making people feel sorry for her. Claire lowered her eyes instantly. Adrian caught that too. The shame. The exhaustion. The way she accepted cruelty like she had heard it too many times before. Something cold moved behind his eyes. Interesting, Adrian said softly. Because from where I am standing, she looks like the only person here with dignity. Tyler's face hardened. The blonde woman scoffed loudly. You cannot seriously believe she belongs in your world. Adrian finally looked directly at her. And what exactly is my world? The woman hesitated. People with standards. Adrian gave a faint nod. Then Claire belongs there far more than either of you. Tyler's expression darkened instantly. Claire could barely process what was happening anymore. Nobody had defended her like this in years. Not since before the pregnancy. Before the cancelled wedding. Before the endless whispers that she had trapped a wealthy fiancé with a baby he never wanted. Adrian stepped closer to Claire then. Not possessive. Protective. The difference hit her harder than she expected. You are freezing, he said quietly to her. Get in the car. Claire looked up quickly. I cannot. You can. Mr. Ashford, I do not think this is a good idea. Adrian. What? If we are married tonight, he said calmly, you should probably stop calling me Mr. Ashford. Tyler muttered something under his breath. Adrian ignored him completely. Instead, he removed a pair of black leather gloves from his coat pocket and handed them to Claire. The gesture was so unexpectedly gentle that her eyes burned again instantly. Put those on, he said. Claire stared at the gloves for one silent second before slowly taking them. They were still warm from his hands. Tyler suddenly stepped forward. Claire, enough with the drama. You embarrassed yourself already. Let us just go. Adrian's entire posture changed. Subtle. Immediate. The kind of stillness powerful men carried right before everyone else backed down. She is not going anywhere with you, Adrian said. Tyler frowned. This has nothing to do with you. You made it my business the moment you spoke to her like that. The rain intensified around them. Claire's heart pounded harder with every passing second. People passing on the sidewalk had started staring openly now. Some already recognized Adrian. Phones were beginning to appear discreetly in strangers' hands. Tyler noticed too. His confidence started slipping. You do not even know her, he snapped. Adrian looked toward Claire briefly. She stood there exhausted and soaked through, holding a paper pharmacy bag against her pregnant stomach like it contained her entire life. Then he looked back at Tyler. I know enough. The words landed heavily in the cold night air. Tyler opened his mouth again, but the blonde woman grabbed his arm first. Forget it, she whispered sharply. This is not worth it. Tyler hesitated. Pride battled humiliation across his face. Finally, he gave Claire one last bitter look. You always wanted someone rich to rescue you. Claire's expression crumpled for the briefest second. Adrian saw it. And this time, his voice lost even the last trace of warmth. Leave. Tyler stiffened. Adrian took one slow step forward. Now. That was enough. Tyler turned sharply and stormed back toward the sports car with the blonde woman hurrying behind him. Seconds later, the car disappeared into Manhattan traffic. Silence returned beneath the rain. Claire stood motionless beside the black SUV, breathing unevenly. Adrian looked down at her carefully. Up close, she looked even more exhausted than before. Pale lips. Dark circles beneath beautiful gray eyes. One hand unconsciously rubbing the side of her stomach where the baby had started moving again. Are you in pain? He asked quietly. Claire blinked in surprise. What? You touched your side 3 times in the last minute. Nobody noticed things like that anymore. Nobody paid attention to her long enough. It is nothing, she whispered automatically. Adrian studied her for another second. Then he opened the SUV door himself. Get inside before you collapse. Claire hesitated. Everything about this situation felt impossible. Dangerous in ways she could not explain. Men like Adrian Ashford did not stop for women like her. They certainly did not pretend to be their husbands in the middle of Manhattan. Yet his voice held no manipulation. No hidden pressure. Just calm certainty. I live in Queens, she said softly. That is fine. You really do not have to do this. Adrian's gaze settled on her face again. Tired. Honest. Proud even now. Claire, he said quietly. When a pregnant woman almost faints buying medication at midnight, decent people help her. Her throat tightened painfully, because somewhere along the way she had stopped believing decent people still existed. Claire finally stepped into the SUV as another freezing gust of rain swept across the sidewalk behind her. The door closed with a soft, insulated thud that instantly shut out the noise of Manhattan traffic. Warm air wrapped around her aching body almost immediately. She had not realized how badly she had been shivering until now. The interior looked less like a car and more like a private luxury suite. Soft black leather, dim lighting, a faint scent of cedar and expensive cologne lingering in the air. Claire sat carefully against the edge of the seat, clutching the pharmacy bag tightly against her stomach. Adrian slid in beside her a moment later. "Queens," he instructed the driver calmly. The older man behind the wheel nodded once and pulled smoothly away from the curb. Silence settled over the car at first. Claire stared out the rain-streaked window, mortified by everything that had just happened. Pretending he was her husband. Tyler seeing it. Adrian defending her like she mattered. None of it felt real. "You should take off the wet coat," Adrian said quietly beside her. Claire glanced at him quickly. "I am fine. You are shivering. I will survive." Adrian studied her profile for a moment. There was no annoyance in his expression. Only observation. "Do you always answer concern with resistance?" Claire let out a small breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Usually." Something shifted faintly at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "That sounds exhausting." Claire looked down at her hands. Being pregnant and broke is exhausting. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Embarrassment hit immediately after. She hated sounding pathetic. Adrian did not react with pity the way most people did. He simply nodded once as if acknowledging a fact. "Yes," he said quietly. "I imagine it is." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. No fake sympathy. No awkward reassurance. Just simple acknowledgement. The SUV turned onto the Queensboro Bridge. Rain blurred the city lights into streaks of gold and white beyond the windows. Claire shifted carefully against the seat as another dull pain tightened low in her stomach. Adrian noticed instantly. "How far along are you?" he asked. 31 weeks. "And you are working?" 2 jobs. His gaze sharpened slightly. "Doing what?" "Waitressing nights. Remote data entry during the day when I can get contracts." Adrian looked toward the rain outside briefly. "That schedule is dangerous this late in pregnancy." Claire laughed softly this time, though there was no humor in it. "So is rent in New York." The car fell quiet again. Claire could feel his attention without looking at him directly. Most wealthy men she had met carried themselves with loud arrogance. Adrian Ashford did not. His presence filled space differently. Calmly. Completely. Like someone used to being obeyed without ever raising his voice. "What about the father?" he asked finally. Claire's entire body tensed. Adrian noticed immediately. "You do not have to answer that." She stared down at the gloves still covering her hands. His gloves. Warm. Expensive. Ridiculously soft. "He left," she said quietly after a moment. "When he found out about the baby?" Claire nodded once. Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Coward." The single word landed heavily in the quiet car. Claire swallowed hard. Nobody had ever reacted with anger on her behalf before. Most people simply looked uncomfortable when pregnancy came up. Like abandonment was somehow contagious. "It is more complicated than that," she whispered automatically. Adrian turned toward her slightly. "Women always say that when they are protecting someone who hurt them." Claire blinked in surprise. He said it so matter-of-factly, like he had seen it before. Maybe he had. Men like Adrian probably witnessed every ugly side of humanity from the top of billion-dollar boardrooms. The baby shifted suddenly beneath Claire's ribs, harder this time. She inhaled sharply and pressed her hand instinctively against her stomach. Adrian's attention dropped immediately. "Are you all right?" "She kicks when I am stressed." Adrian stared for one silent second. "She." Claire nodded softly despite herself. "It is a girl." Something unreadable flickered through Adrian's expression again. Softer this time. Almost distant. "Does she have a name?" Claire's fingers brushed gently across her stomach. Not yet. You should choose one soon. I know. Her voice weakened slightly. I just wanted to meet her first. Adrian looked away toward the rain-covered skyline again. Claire suddenly realized how tired he looked beneath the polished exterior. Faint shadows beneath his eyes. The stiffness in his shoulders. Men like him probably carried entire corporations on their backs 24 hours a day. Yet somehow he had stopped for her tonight. The thought made no sense. Why did you help me? She asked quietly. Adrian did not answer immediately. The city light slid across his face in shifting patterns. Because decent people should not suffer alone, he said finally. Claire almost smiled sadly at that. You keep saying decent people. Adrian glanced at her. Do you disagree? Her eyes drifted back toward the window. I think people are only kind when it costs them nothing. Adrian became very still beside her. Someone taught you that. Claire let out a faint breath. Life taught me that. For the first time all night, Adrian looked genuinely affected by something she said. Not pity. Not curiosity. Recognition. Before Claire could understand why, the SUV slowed beside an aging brick apartment building with flickering hallway lights and rusted fire escapes dripping rainwater above the street. Adrian's gaze moved slowly upward along the building exterior. You live here? Claire nodded quietly, already embarrassed again. 3rd floor. The neighborhood was safe enough during daylight. At midnight it looked tired and forgotten. Trash bags lined the curb beneath broken street lamps. A grocery cart sat overturned near the entrance gate. Claire reached quickly for the door handle. Thank you for the ride. Adrian did not move. Claire. She paused. What? His eyes settled on her face carefully. Have you eaten tonight? The question hit harder than she expected. Because the answer was no. And somehow terrifyingly he already knew that too. Claire's fingers tightened around the SUV door handle as Adrian's question settled heavily between them. Have you eaten tonight? Such a simple question. Yet it nearly unraveled her completely. She looked away first. I had coffee earlier. Adrian remained silent. Claire suddenly felt absurdly exposed beneath that silence. Like he could see every skipped meal. Every overdue bill folded inside her purse. Every night she had pretended crackers counted as dinner because prenatal vitamins worked better on a full stomach she could not afford. That is not an answer, Adrian said quietly. Claire forced a small shrug. Pregnancy makes people nauseous sometimes. And lying apparently comes naturally to you. She looked at him sharply then. Adrian's expression remained calm, but his eyes were impossibly observant. You almost fainted in the pharmacy, he continued evenly. Your hands were shaking when you picked up the medication. And you have not once mentioned going upstairs to eat. Claire hated how accurate he was. I will be fine. Adrian glanced toward the apartment building again. The entrance light flickered weakly above rusted mailboxes and chipped concrete steps stained dark from years of rain. Does someone live with you? No family nearby? Claire shook her head once. No. Adrian looked back at her slowly. The exhaustion in her face suddenly made more sense now. Pregnant. Alone. Working 2 jobs. Living in a building where the security gate barely latched closed. Something cold and deeply familiar tightened in his chest before he could stop it. He recognized survival when he saw it. He had worn the same expression himself once. Years ago. Before money erased visible desperation but failed to erase the memory of it. Claire reached for the door again. Thank you for the ride. Really? Wait. She paused reluctantly. Adrian leaned forward slightly and pressed a button near the center console. The privacy divider between the front and back seats rose silently. Claire stiffened immediately. Adrian noticed at once. Relax, he said calmly. I am not trapping you. Embarrassment flushed her cheeks. I did not think that. You did. Before Claire could respond, Adrian removed his phone and typed something quickly. A moment later another button illuminated softly near the door. What are you doing? She asked cautiously. Ordering dinner. Claire blinked in confusion. For who? Adrian looked at her like the answer should have been obvious. For the pregnant woman who has not eaten. Her pride rose instantly again. Mr. Ashford, you really do not need to. Adrian. She exhaled softly. Adrian, I cannot let you keep spending money on me. Why? The question caught her off guard. Adrian slipped his phone back into his coat pocket. You keep apologizing for existing, he said quietly. I am beginning to wonder who taught you that. Claire looked down at her lap. You do not know me. No, Adrian agreed. But I know exhaustion. I know what survival looks like. And I know you are running on nothing except stubbornness right now. The accuracy of it made her throat tighten painfully. She turned toward the rain-streaked window before he could see her eyes shining again. Nobody had paid enough attention to notice things like that in a very long time. Outside, a delivery car pulled up beside the SUV less than 10 minutes later. Claire stared in disbelief as a man hurried toward them carrying 2 insulated restaurant bags from one of the most expensive Italian restaurants in Manhattan. Adrian accepted the bags calmly through the partially lowered window. You planned this already? Claire asked quietly. I assumed you would say no if I asked first. Against her will, a tiny laugh escaped her. Real this time. Adrian looked at her immediately. The sound seemed to catch him slightly off guard too. Claire quickly covered it with embarrassment. Sorry. Do not apologize for laughing. He handed her one of the warm containers. Eat. The smell alone nearly destroyed her composure. Fresh bread. Garlic. Real food. Not instant noodles or cheap granola bars from vending machines between shifts. Claire opened the container carefully and stared down at creamy pasta with grilled chicken arranged perfectly inside. This probably costs more than my electric bill, she muttered softly. Adrian removed his own jacket with slow precision, rolling up the sleeves of his white dress shirt slightly before opening his meal. Then your electric company should reconsider its pricing. Claire looked at him in surprise. Was that a joke? His expression remained completely serious. That somehow made it funnier. Another small laugh escaped before she could stop it. Adrian watched her for one quiet second. Softer now. Warmer. Claire carefully took the first bite. The moment the food hit her stomach, she realized just how hungry she truly was. Adrian pretended not to notice the way she immediately took a second bite after that. Then a third. Slow down, he said quietly. You will make yourself sick. Claire lowered the fork slightly, embarrassed again. Sorry. Adrian looked at her steadily. There it is again. She frowned faintly. What? Apologizing for basic human needs. Claire stared down at the food in silence. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows around them. Warmth filled the SUV now, carrying away some of the cold lodged deep inside her bones. For the first time in months, she did not feel like she was bracing for impact every second. Adrian watched her carefully as she ate. Then his gaze drifted downward briefly toward the gentle curve of her stomach beneath the oversized sweater. Does she kick often? Claire instinctively rested one hand against her belly again. Her expression changed instantly. Softer. Full of quiet love despite exhaustion. Mostly at night. Adrian noticed the difference immediately. The fear disappeared whenever she talked about the baby. She likes music too, Claire added quietly. Especially piano. Something almost imperceptible crossed Adrian's face then. Recognition perhaps. Interesting. Claire glanced at him curiously. Why? Adrian looked away toward the rain-dark city outside. My mother used to play piano every night when I was a child. His voice had changed slightly. Lower now. Distant. Claire studied him carefully for the first time since entering the SUV. Billionaire. Ew. Powerful enough to intimidate entire rooms with a glance. Yet suddenly he did not look untouchable anymore. Just tired. Lonely in a way money clearly could not fix. Before she could stop herself, she asked quietly, Do you miss her? Adrian became very still beside her. For a moment, Claire thought he would not answer at all. Then he looked back at the rain beyond the glass and said softly, Every day. For several quiet seconds after Adrian spoke, neither of them moved. Rain continued sliding down the dark windows of the SUV, while Manhattan traffic hummed faintly beyond the glass. Claire lowered her eyes slowly toward the half-finished meal resting in her lap. I am sorry, she said softly. Adrian leaned back against the leather seat. Do not be. You did not know. Claire nodded once, though something about the sadness in his voice stayed with her. Powerful men were not supposed to sound lonely. They were supposed to sound untouchable. Yet tonight Adrian Ashford looked like someone carrying exhaustion that expensive suits could not hide. Claire carefully closed the food container and set it aside. I should go upstairs before it gets later. Adrian glanced toward the apartment building again. Rainwater dripped steadily from the rusted fire escapes overhead. One hallway window on the second floor flickered weakly before going dark completely. Does the elevator work? He asked suddenly. Claire let out a quiet laugh. Not since February. Adrian looked unimpressed. You climb 3 flights of stairs every day at 31 weeks pregnant? Usually more than once. That is ridiculous. That is New York. Adrian stared at her for another moment before opening his door. Claire blinked in confusion. What are you doing? Walking you upstairs. You absolutely do not need to do that. Adrian stepped out into the rain anyway. Probably not, he said calmly. But I am going to. Claire watched him circle the SUV with quiet disbelief. Men like Adrian Ashford did not carry grocery bags into broken apartment buildings at midnight. Yet seconds later he was already opening her door and offering his hand to help her out onto the wet sidewalk. Claire hesitated briefly before placing her hand in his. Warm, steady, careful with her weight. Nobody had held her hand gently in a very long time. The old apartment hallway smelled faintly like bleach and radiator heat. Somewhere upstairs a baby cried behind thin walls. Adrian followed beside Claire silently as they climbed the narrow staircase. Halfway to the 3rd floor, Claire slowed slightly as pressure tightened low in her back again. Adrian noticed immediately. Stop for a second. I am okay. Claire. Something in his voice made her pause. Adrian moved closer instinctively, one hand hovering near her elbow without touching. You are pale. Claire pressed a hand against the railing. It is just Braxton Hicks contractions. The doctor said stress can trigger them. Adrian's expression darkened immediately. And tonight was stressful. Claire gave him a tired look. That usually happens when your ex humiliates you in the street. Adrian became very still beside her. He did more than humiliate you. Claire looked away quietly. Tyler was not always like this. Women say that too. She almost smiled despite herself. You really do not like him. I dislike cowards. The simplicity of the answer made warmth flicker unexpectedly inside her chest. Adrian waited until her breathing steadied before continuing upstairs beside her. When Claire finally unlocked apartment 3B, embarrassment hit instantly. She wished she had more warning. Time to clean. Time to hide how difficult things had become. The apartment was painfully small. A faded gray couch sat beneath a window that rattled softly from the storm outside. Stacks of unopened medical bills covered part of the tiny kitchen counter beside a second-hand breast pump still inside its box. A baby crib stood partially assembled near the far wall. One side remained unfinished because Claire had not figured out the instructions alone yet. Adrian stepped inside slowly without saying a word. Claire immediately moved toward the kitchen, trying to gather the bills into a pile. It is usually cleaner than this. Adrian's gaze swept quietly across the apartment. Nearly empty refrigerator magnets. Prenatal appointment reminders taped beside overdue notices. Tiny baby clothes folded carefully on the arm of the couch despite everything else falling apart around them. Then his eyes landed on a framed ultrasound photo sitting near the sink. Claire noticed too late. She froze. Adrian stepped closer to the photograph. Not intrusive. Careful somehow. The black and white image showed the unmistakable profile of a tiny baby girl. Beneath it, handwritten in faded blue ink, were the words 30 weeks. Healthy heartbeat. Adrian stared at it silently for several seconds. Claire suddenly felt strangely exposed. I know it probably looks silly, she murmured. Most people do not frame ultrasound pictures. Adrian looked at her then. Most people are not growing an entire human being alone. Her throat tightened instantly. Adrian's gaze drifted toward the unfinished crib next. You built that yourself? Claire nodded awkwardly. Well, tried to. Something shifted faintly in Adrian's expression. He removed his suit jacket slowly and draped it over the back of a chair. Where are the instructions? Claire blinked. What? The crib. He loosened the cuffs of his white dress shirt slightly. Where are the instructions? Claire stared at him in disbelief. You cannot seriously be planning to build furniture right now. Adrian looked toward the half-finished crib with complete calm. I have negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions across 3 continents. His eyes met hers briefly. I think I can manage a crib. Before Claire could respond, the apartment lights flickered once. Then everything went completely dark. Silence swallowed the room. Rain pounded harder against the windows. Claire closed her eyes immediately. No, she whispered under her breath. Adrian's voice cut through the darkness. Calm. Steady. What happened? Claire swallowed hard. Embarrassment flooded her instantly. I think the electricity got shut off. Silence followed. Heavy this time. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled across the city. Claire stood frozen in the dark apartment, humiliated beyond words. And then she heard Adrian move toward her through the darkness instead of toward the door. The darkness inside the apartment felt heavier than it should have. Claire stood motionless beside the kitchen counter, one hand instinctively covering her stomach while humiliation burned through her chest. Of course the electricity had failed tonight. Not tomorrow. Not when she was alone and could pretend it did not matter. Tonight. While Adrian Ashford stood inside her tiny apartment seeing exactly how far her life had fallen apart. Lightning flashed faintly through the rain-streaked windows, briefly illuminating the room in pale blue light. Claire immediately moved toward the counter drawer. I have candles somewhere. Adrian's calm voice stopped her. Do not rush around in the dark. I know this apartment. You are 31 weeks pregnant. Another flash of lightning lit the room for half a second. Claire caught the outline of Adrian removing his phone from his pocket. A moment later, the flashlight illuminated the apartment softly. Warm white light swept across the unfinished crib. The unpaid bills. The old couch. Claire wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Adrian said nothing about any of it. That somehow made it worse. Most wealthy people reacted to poverty with awkward sympathy or visible discomfort. Adrian simply observed quietly, as though none of this changed the way he looked at her. Claire finally found the candles and lit them carefully with trembling fingers. Soft amber light flickered across the apartment walls. Rain tapped steadily against the windows while thunder rolled somewhere far across Queens. Adrian stood near the crib with his jacket still folded neatly over the chair. Even surrounded by darkness and peeling paint, he somehow looked composed enough to belong in a Manhattan boardroom instead of apartment 3B. Claire exhaled shakily. You should probably go. Adrian looked toward her. Because the lights went out? Because this is embarrassing. The honesty slipped out before she could stop it. Adrian studied her face for a long moment. Claire. She looked away immediately. You do not have to pretend this is normal. I am not pretending. People like you do not end up in places like this. Adrian's expression changed slightly at that. Quieter now. More distant. You would be surprised where people like me started. Claire frowned faintly. Adrian set his phone flashlight down on the kitchen counter before speaking again. My father drank away most of our rent money before I turned 10. Claire blinked in surprise. What? My mother worked 3 jobs. His voice remained calm, but something underneath it had sharpened painfully. Some nights the power went out for weeks. Claire stared at him speechlessly. None of that matched the image the world had created around Adrian Ashford. Billionaire. Ew. Ruthless businessman raised among privilege and glass towers. Adrian leaned lightly against the wall beside the crib. The first suit I ever owned came from a church donation box. Claire felt something tighten unexpectedly inside her chest. I did not know. Adrian gave a faint shrug. Most people do not. Silence settled between them again, softer this time. Claire suddenly understood something important. Adrian did not look uncomfortable here because none of this frightened him. He remembered it too well. Another low cramp tightened across Claire's stomach unexpectedly. She inhaled sharply and reached for the edge of the counter. Adrian moved instantly. Sit down. I am okay. Now, Claire. The authority in his voice left no room for argument. Before she could protest again, Adrian pulled out one of the small kitchen chairs and guided her toward it carefully. Not controlling. Protective. Claire lowered herself into the chair slowly while breathing through the tightening pressure. Adrian crouched slightly beside her, his expression focused entirely on her face now. How often has this been happening? Just tonight. That is not what I asked. Claire looked away. A few days. Adrian's jaw tightened visibly. And your doctor knows? I missed my last appointment. Silence. Heavy this time. Adrian stared at her as if trying to understand how someone could carry this much alone without collapsing completely. Why? He asked quietly. Claire swallowed hard. The copay increased. Adrian closed his eyes briefly. Just once. But Claire saw the anger move across his face before he controlled it again. Not anger at her. Anger for her. Somehow that felt far more dangerous. You skipped prenatal care because of money. Claire hated how small her voice sounded now. I was going to reschedule after my next paycheck. Adrian stood slowly and turned away toward the rain-dark window. His broad shoulders looked impossibly tense beneath the white dress shirt. Claire suddenly realized he was furious. Deeply furious. Yet his voice remained perfectly controlled when he spoke again. No woman should ever have to choose between medical care and rent. Claire let out a tired breath. A lot of women do. Adrian turned back toward her slowly. Candlelight flickered across the sharp lines of his face. That does not make it acceptable. The baby kicked suddenly then. Hard enough that Claire gasped softly and pressed both hands against her stomach. Adrian froze instantly. What happened? Claire let out a startled laugh. She disagrees with you yelling. Adrian stared at her stomach with visible uncertainty. I was not yelling. She is dramatic. Another kick landed beneath Claire's hand. This one visibly shifted the fabric of her sweater. Adrian's eyes widened slightly before he could hide it. Claire noticed immediately. Have you never felt a baby kick before? Adrian looked strangely caught off guard by the question. No, the answer was quieter than before. Claire hesitated only briefly before speaking. You can. Adrian frowned faintly. What? Claire gently took his hand before she could lose courage and guided it carefully toward the side of her stomach. The moment his palm rested there, the baby kicked again directly against his hand. Adrian went completely still. Claire looked up instinctively. The expression on his face changed so suddenly it almost stole her breath. Shock first, then wonder. Pure and unguarded. Like something inside him had cracked open unexpectedly beneath candlelight and rain. Another tiny kick pressed against his palm. Adrian stared down in complete silence. Then, almost too quietly to hear, he whispered, "Hello there." Adrian kept his hand against Claire's stomach long after the baby stopped moving. Candlelight flickered softly across his face while rain continued whispering against the apartment windows. Claire had never seen a man look at her pregnancy like that before. Not fear. Not obligation. Wonder. Pure and quiet. Adrian slowly lifted his gaze toward her. Something vulnerable had appeared briefly in his expression before the familiar control returned. She is strong, he said softly. Claire's hand remained lightly over his. She kicks hardest when someone talks to her. Adrian glanced back down instinctively, almost as if expecting another tiny movement beneath his palm. Claire felt warmth spread unexpectedly through her chest watching him. This powerful, intimidating man crouched beside a half-finished crib in a dark apartment, speaking gently to an unborn baby he had met less than an hour ago. Nothing about tonight made sense anymore. Adrian carefully withdrew his hand at last, though he moved slower than before, like he did not entirely want to let go. Then his phone vibrated sharply against the kitchen counter. The sudden sound shattered the quiet moment instantly. Adrian's expression hardened the second he saw the screen. I need to take this. Claire nodded quickly, already embarrassed by how intimate the last few minutes had felt. Adrian stepped toward the window and answered in a low voice. What? Claire tried not to listen. She focused instead on adjusting one of the tiny folded baby blankets near the couch. But Adrian's tone changed almost immediately. Colder now. Dangerous. Who authorized that statement? Silence followed while someone spoke rapidly on the other end. Adrian's jaw tightened visibly. No, he said flatly. Absolutely not. Claire glanced toward him despite herself. Adrian stood near the rain-dark window like a completely different person now. Not the man who had whispered hello to her daughter seconds ago. This was the billionaire CEO the world feared. Controlled. Ruthless. Untouchable. I do not care what the board thinks, Adrian continued coldly into the phone. Handle the media before morning. Claire's stomach tightened uneasily. Media. Her heart sank instantly. Tyler. Someone must have recognized them outside the pharmacy. Adrian ended the call abruptly and turned back toward her. Claire already knew. There are pictures online, right? Adrian did not insult her with denial. Yes. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Of course there were. Manhattan never missed an opportunity for gossip, especially involving powerful men and public drama. I am sorry, she whispered immediately. Adrian frowned faintly. Why are you apologizing? Because your life is probably exploding because of me. Adrian walked back toward the kitchen counter slowly. My life exploded years ago. This is just inconvenience. Claire let out a tired breath despite herself. That might be the most billionaire thing anyone has ever said. To her surprise, Adrian's mouth twitched faintly again. Almost a smile. Then his expression darkened once more. The problem is not the photographs. Claire looked at him carefully. Then what is it? Adrian hesitated briefly before answering. The board thinks this relationship damages public perception. Claire felt her chest tighten immediately. There it was. Reality. Men like Adrian Ashford lived in worlds where appearances mattered more than people. She stood up carefully from the chair. You do not have to explain anything to me. I understand. Adrian watched her quietly. Do you? Claire forced herself to nod. I know what I look like. Silence filled the apartment again. Adrian's expression became unreadable. And what exactly do you think you look like? Claire laughed softly, though it sounded painful even to her own ears. A pregnant waitress standing beside one of the richest men in New York. Adrian said nothing. Claire wrapped her arms lightly around herself. People like Tyler already think I trap wealthy men for survival. Now there are photographs online of me climbing into your SUV after pretending to be your wife. Adrian's eyes sharpened immediately. You did not trap anyone. That is not what people will say. I do not care what people say. Claire looked at him steadily then. Maybe you should. Adrian became very still. Claire gestured weakly toward the dark apartment around them. I already know how this story sounds. Poor pregnant woman gets rescued by billionaire CEO. Her voice weakened slightly near the end. Nobody ever assumes the woman still has dignity. Something cold flashed behind Adrian's eyes again. Anyone who mistakes survival for manipulation is a fool. Claire swallowed hard. Nobody defended her like that. Nobody. Before she could answer, her phone suddenly buzzed violently across the kitchen counter. Then again. And again. Text notifications flooded the screen one after another. Claire stared at it with immediate dread. Adrian glanced toward the phone too. Slowly Claire picked it up. Her blood turned cold almost instantly. Unknown numbers. Social media alerts. Screenshots. Gossip accounts already posting blurry photos of her outside the pharmacy wrapped in Adrian's coat, while he held the SUV door open beside her. One headline read Billionaire CEO Adrian Ashford spotted with pregnant mystery woman after midnight encounter. Another was crueler. New gold digger or secret affair. Claire's hands began shaking immediately. Adrian noticed at once. Give me the phone. Claire barely heard him. More notifications appeared every second. Comments. Thousands already. She recognized Tyler's blonde girlfriend in one of the leaked photos smiling beside the headline. Humiliation crashed over her all at once. Oh God. Adrian crossed the room instantly and took the phone gently but firmly from her trembling hands. His expression darkened with every passing second as he scanned the screen. Then something in him seemed to snap completely cold. Enough. Claire looked up helplessly. This is my fault. Adrian locked the phone screen and set it face down on the counter. No. If I had not grabbed your arm outside. Claire. His voice cut through her panic sharply but not cruelly. Look at me. She did. Adrian stepped closer. Calm. Certain. Powerful in the kind of way that made chaos itself seem smaller. You did nothing wrong. Claire's eyes burned painfully. Your company disagrees. Adrian's expression hardened instantly. My company does not decide who deserves basic human decency. Another notification vibrated loudly across the counter. Adrian ignored it completely. His attention remained fixed entirely on Claire. Listen to me carefully, he said quietly. Nobody gets to shame you for surviving. Claire stared at him silently while thunder rolled outside the apartment windows again. Then Adrian's phone rang once more. He glanced at the screen briefly this time before answering. What now? A pause. Adrian's face went completely expressionless. Dangerous again. The board scheduled an emergency meeting? Silence. Then colder still. Tomorrow morning. Claire's stomach dropped instantly, because suddenly she understood. Tonight was no longer just gossip. She had become a problem powerful people intended to solve. Claire barely slept after Adrian finally left the apartment close to 2 in the morning. The electricity returned sometime before dawn, but the warmth never truly came back. Her phone continued vibrating across the nightstand every few minutes with messages she stopped reading after the first hour. By sunrise, 3 gossip blogs had reposted the photographs. By 8 o'clock, national entertainment sites were calling her Adrian Ashford's secret pregnant mistress. Claire sat at the tiny kitchen table wrapped in an oversized sweater, staring numbly at the cold coffee in front of her while rain clouds lingered over Queens outside the window. The unfinished crib stood beside the couch exactly where Adrian had left it before the board meeting call interrupted everything. One screw still rested near the instruction manual. Claire's chest tightened painfully at the sight of it. Last night already felt unreal, like something borrowed from another woman's life. Her phone buzzed again. This time the name on the screen made her stomach drop instantly. Tyler. Claire almost ignored it. Almost. But after the 4th call in a row, she finally answered. What? Tyler's voice came sharp and furious through the speaker. What the hell are you doing? Claire closed her eyes briefly. Good morning to you too. Do not play games with me right now. She could hear traffic and car horns behind him. He was already out somewhere. Probably already dressed in another expensive suit bought with family money. The entire internet thinks you are sleeping with Adrian Ashford. Claire laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. The internet survived worse. Tyler lowered his voice angrily. You embarrassed me. That hit something raw inside her instantly. I embarrassed you? People are asking questions, Claire. My mother saw the articles this morning. Claire stared out the rain-streaked window in disbelief. Your mother, she repeated quietly. That is what you care about. Tyler exhaled sharply. Do not start this again. No, Claire whispered. I think I finally understand it perfectly. Silence followed briefly. Then Tyler spoke again, colder this time. You really think a man like Adrian Ashford wants a broke pregnant woman? Claire's fingers tightened around the phone. I never said he did. Then stop acting like this fantasy is real. Her chest hurt unexpectedly at the words, because part of her already knew he was right. Men like Adrian Ashford did not stay in apartments like hers. They certainly did not choose women carrying another man's child. Last night had only been temporary kindness. A moment. Nothing more. Tyler continued before she could respond. You always do this. You make people feel sorry for you until they rescue you. Claire's eyes filled instantly. Not because she believed him anymore. Because she used to. Before she learned that survival and manipulation were not the same thing. Goodbye, Tyler. Claire, she hung up first. Then blocked his number with shaking fingers. The apartment suddenly felt too quiet afterward. Too small. Claire pressed both hands against her stomach and inhaled slowly. It is okay, she whispered softly to the baby. Mom is okay. But tears slid down her face anyway. 3 hours later, she stood inside the employee restroom of the downtown restaurant where she waitressed nights and weekends, staring at her reflection beneath harsh fluorescent lights. The dark circles beneath her eyes looked worse today. Pregnancy exhaustion mixed with humiliation and almost no sleep. Her manager, Denise, had called her into the office 20 minutes earlier with tight lips and obvious discomfort. Claire already knew before the conversation started. I am really sorry, Denise had whispered. Corporate is worried about media attention. Media attention. As if Claire were a scandal instead of a human being. She had lost the shift schedule effective immediately. No screaming. No dramatic firing. Just polite corporate fear disguised as professionalism. Claire splashed cold water against her face and tried not to panic. Rent was already overdue. The prenatal medication from last night sat inside her purse beside unpaid bills and $37 in cash. Her phone buzzed again suddenly inside the pocket of her sweater. Unknown number. Claire almost ignored it before exhaustion won over caution. "Hello. Miss Hartwell?" a polished female voice asked. "This is Evelyn Brooks from Ashford Global." Claire straightened immediately. "Oh, Mr. Ashford would like to see you." Her pulse quickened instantly. "Why?" A slight pause followed. "There has been a development." Claire's stomach tightened uneasily. What kind of development? Evelyn's voice remained carefully professional. The board meeting did not go well. 20 minutes later, Claire stepped out of a yellow cab in front of Ashford Global headquarters in Midtown Manhattan. The building towered above the city like polished glass and steel reaching into gray storm clouds. Employees in tailored coats moved quickly through the revolving doors while luxury cars lined the curb outside. Claire instantly felt out of place standing there in worn maternity jeans and a thrifted wool coat. She almost turned around twice before finally walking inside. The lobby looked more like a luxury hotel than a corporate building. Marble floors. Massive crystal lighting. Security guards wearing discreet earpieces. Every polished surface reflected money and power. Several people glanced toward Claire immediately, then again at her stomach. Recognition spread almost instantly across a few faces. Whispers followed quietly behind manicured hands. Claire's cheeks burned. A tall woman in a navy designer suit approached moments later. "Miss Hartwell." Claire nodded nervously. "I am Evelyn." The woman's expression softened slightly. "Right this way." Claire followed her toward the private executive elevators, while dozens of eyes tracked her movement across the lobby. The higher the elevator climbed, the tighter Claire's chest became. Penthouse level. Of course. Men like Adrian literally lived above the rest of the world. When the doors finally opened, silence greeted them immediately. Thick carpet muted every footstep. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked all of Manhattan beneath darkening clouds. Evelyn led Claire down a long hallway before stopping outside massive double doors. She hesitated slightly before speaking. "He has not stopped arguing with them for 3 hours." Claire frowned faintly. "Arguing with who?" Evelyn gave her a careful look. "Everyone." Then she opened the office doors. Adrian stood near the enormous windows with his back partially turned. One hand loosened at his tie while several board members in expensive suits faced him across the room with visible tension. The second Adrian noticed Claire standing in the doorway, the entire atmosphere changed instantly. His expression hardened completely. "Meeting over," he said coldly. One older board member turned sharply. "Adrian, this is exactly the problem." Adrian never looked away from Claire. "Leave." The room fell dead silent. Because suddenly every powerful person there realized one terrifying thing at the exact same moment. Adrian Ashford was choosing a side. And it was not theirs. Nobody moved at first after Adrian spoke. The massive executive office remained wrapped in heavy silence while rain battered softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Claire stood frozen near the doorway, painfully aware of every expensive suit now staring directly at her. One woman near the conference table looked openly irritated. Another older man adjusted his glasses with visible disbelief. Adrian remained beside the windows, one hand resting against the back of a leather chair while tension radiated from him like cold steel. "Adrian," the gray-haired board member began carefully, "we are discussing a serious corporate issue." Adrian's expression did not change. "And I said the meeting is over." The older man glanced toward Claire again. "With respect, your personal decisions are already affecting shareholder confidence." Claire's stomach tightened instantly. She should not have come here. This entire world clearly viewed her as damage already. Adrian slowly straightened to his full height. "My personal life is not controlled by shareholders. When it impacts the company, it absolutely is." Another board member stepped forward slightly. "The media narrative is becoming dangerous. Investors are asking questions about your judgment." Adrian's eyes turned ice cold. "Because I helped a pregnant woman in the rain?" Nobody answered immediately. The silence itself felt ugly. Claire lowered her eyes, suddenly wishing she could disappear completely. Adrian noticed instantly. Something dangerous flickered across his face. "Leave," he repeated more sharply this time. The tension inside the room snapped. Chairs shifted back. Papers gathered quickly. No one argued again after that. One by one, the executives filed past Claire toward the door. Some avoided looking at her altogether. Others looked too long. Judgment wrapped inside expensive politeness. The gray-haired board member paused before leaving completely. "This is not finished, Adrian." Adrian's voice remained perfectly calm. "It is for today." The man exhaled tightly before walking out. Seconds later, the office doors closed behind the final executive. Silence returned. Real silence this time. Claire remained near the doorway awkwardly, clutching her purse tightly against her chest. Adrian loosened his tie fully and crossed the room toward her. The second he stood close enough to see her face clearly, his expression shifted immediately. "Softer now. You look exhausted." Claire let out a small breath. "I almost turned around downstairs." Adrian frowned faintly. "Why?" Claire gave him a tired look. "Because your board looked one step away from voting to throw me into the Hudson River." To her surprise, Adrian actually let out a quiet laugh. Brief, deep, real. It changed his entire face for half a second before control returned again. "They are afraid of scandal," he said. "They are afraid of me losing control of the company narrative." Claire looked toward the closed doors uneasily. Maybe they are right. Adrian's gaze sharpened immediately. "No, Adrian. No," he stepped closer. "You are not a mistake I need to manage." The words hit her harder than they should have. Claire looked away quickly before emotion betrayed her again. Adrian noticed. He noticed everything. "What happened today?" he asked quietly. Claire hesitated. "What do you mean?" "Something else happened." His voice lowered slightly. "I can see it." Claire swallowed hard. "I lost my job." The office went completely still. Adrian's jaw tightened instantly. "Why?" Claire laughed softly without humor. "Apparently pregnant women connected to billionaires are bad for restaurant branding." Something cold entered Adrian's expression again. "What was the restaurant called?" Claire blinked in surprise. "Why?" "Because I asked." She hesitated briefly before answering. "Bellamy's." Adrian pulled out his phone immediately. Claire realized what he intended at once. "No." Adrian glanced at her calmly. "No. You cannot destroy businesses every time somebody hurts my feelings. This is not about your feelings." His tone sharpened slightly. "You were terminated because strangers online created gossip." Claire folded her arms tightly across herself. "That still does not give you the right to ruin people." Adrian stared at her for a long moment. Then unexpectedly he lowered the phone without making the call. Claire blinked in surprise. "You listened." Adrian slipped the phone back into his pocket. "You asked me to." Something warm and painful moved through her chest simultaneously. Powerful men usually did whatever they wanted. Adrian could probably erase entire companies before lunch if he chose to. Yet somehow he had stopped because she asked him to. Adrian walked toward the bar near the conference table and poured a glass of water before handing it to her. "Sit down before you fall over." Claire accepted the glass carefully. "You say that a lot. Because you look like you are surviving on caffeine and stubbornness." She almost smiled again. Almost. Then her phone buzzed loudly inside her purse. Claire pulled it out automatically. The moment she saw the screen, all color drained from her face. Adrian noticed instantly. "What?" Claire stared silently at the message for several horrible seconds before answering. "It is my landlord." Adrian's expression hardened immediately. "And?" Her fingers trembled slightly around the phone. "He says if rent is not paid by tomorrow morning, he is changing the locks." Silence crashed heavily between them. Claire looked down quickly, mortified. "I know how this sounds." Adrian stepped closer slowly. "How much?" "Please do not." "Claire." She swallowed hard. 1,200. Adrian became very still. "That is all." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Claire flinched visibly. Adrian closed his eyes briefly. "That came out wrong." No, Claire whispered quietly. It came out honest. Shame flooded her instantly afterward. Adrian studied her face carefully. I did not mean your struggle is insignificant. But to you it is small. Adrian said nothing because denying it would insult her intelligence. $1,200 meant almost nothing in his world. But looking at Claire standing there trying not to cry over losing her apartment made something inside him feel violently wrong. You are not losing your home, he said quietly. Claire laughed softly again. Tired. Defeated. You cannot keep rescuing me every 12 hours. Adrian looked directly into her eyes then. Watch me. Her breath caught unexpectedly. Before either of them could say another word, the office doors burst open without warning. Evelyn stepped inside quickly, visibly pale. Adrian. His expression hardened immediately. What now? Evelyn hesitated only briefly. There are reporters downstairs. Claire's stomach dropped instantly. Evelyn looked toward her apologetically. And somehow they already know her name. For one suspended second after Evelyn spoke, nobody inside the office moved. Claire felt her pulse begin hammering painfully in her throat. Reporters. Downstairs. Asking for her by name. Panic hit instantly. Real panic this time. Not embarrassment. Not humiliation. Fear. I need to leave, Claire said immediately. Adrian's attention snapped toward her. No, Adrian, there are cameras downstairs. I am aware. Claire tightened her grip on her purse. This is already out of control. Evelyn shifted uncomfortably near the office doors. Security is trying to contain them, but several reporters are claiming they have confirmation you spent last night together. Claire's face burned hot with shame. Adrian's expression turned dangerously calm. Who leaked it? Evelyn hesitated. We are still investigating. Adrian's voice dropped lower. Investigate faster. Claire stepped backward instinctively. I should go before this gets worse. Adrian crossed the room toward her immediately. You walking through a crowd of reporters alone while pregnant would be worse. Then I will use the back exit. The back exit already has photographers too. Claire froze completely. The room suddenly felt smaller. Harder to breathe inside. Adrian noticed at once. Sit down. I am fine. Claire. The authority in his voice usually grounded her somehow. Not this time. Her chest tightened painfully instead. I cannot do this, she whispered. I cannot become one of those women people destroy online for entertainment. Adrian's expression shifted immediately. Softer now. Focused entirely on her again instead of the crisis around them. Come here. Claire blinked in surprise. What? You are shaking. She looked down then realized he was right. Her hands trembled visibly against the strap of her purse. Adrian guided her carefully toward the leather sofa near the windows before she could protest. Breathe slowly. Claire sat down stiffly. This was supposed to end after the pharmacy. Adrian crouched slightly in front of her. I know. You were just helping me. I am still helping you. Her eyes burned suddenly. Why? Adrian looked genuinely caught off guard by the question. Why what? Why are you fighting your board for someone you barely know? Silence settled heavily between them. Rain continued tapping softly against the glass walls surrounding the office. Adrian's jaw tightened faintly before he answered. Because everybody else keeps treating you like a problem instead of a person. Claire looked down quickly. Nobody had ever defended her this fiercely before. Not Tyler. Not her former friends after the cancelled wedding. Nobody. Adrian studied her face carefully for several quiet seconds. Then his phone buzzed sharply again. He glanced at the screen with visible irritation before answering. What? Whoever spoke on the other end immediately changed his expression. Not softer. Worse. Cold in a way Claire had not seen before. Send it to me. A pause. Adrian's eyes darkened instantly while reading something on the phone screen. Claire's stomach tightened uneasily. What happened? Adrian did not answer immediately. Evelyn stepped forward slowly. A video surfaced online. Claire felt sick instantly. What kind of video? Adrian looked up at her at last. Controlled. Too controlled. The pharmacy security footage. Claire's blood turned cold. Oh God. Adrian stood slowly and handed the phone toward her. Claire stared at the screen. The footage showed everything. Tyler mocking her outside in the rain. The blonde woman sneering at her pregnancy. Claire grabbing Adrian's sleeve desperately. Then Adrian stepping protectively beside her while cameras captured every second. The comments beneath the video blurred together painfully. Gold digger. Trapping another rich man. Typical pregnant scammer. Claire handed the phone back quickly before tears could spill over. I want to go home. Adrian's expression hardened immediately at the comments still flashing across the screen. No, Claire looked at him helplessly. Please. Adrian became very still. Claire. I cannot sit here while millions of strangers decide what kind of woman I am. Her voice cracked near the end. Adrian looked ready to say something when another sharp pain suddenly twisted low across Claire's stomach. Harder than before. Claire gasped softly and doubled forward instinctively. Adrian moved instantly. What happened? Claire pressed one trembling hand against her stomach while breathing unevenly. Nothing. It is okay. Adrian's voice sharpened immediately. Do not lie to me right now. Another wave of pressure tightened painfully through her lower back. Claire closed her eyes briefly. I think it is stress. Adrian crouched directly in front of her again. His entire focus narrowing dangerously. How long? Since this morning. Claire. I did not want to make it worse. Adrian stood instantly and turned toward Evelyn. Call Dr. Mercer. Evelyn blinked. Your private physician? Now. Claire looked up quickly. No hospitals. Adrian turned back toward her immediately. You are having contractions. Braxton Hicks. You do not know that. Adrian, I cannot afford. Stop. The single word cut through the room sharply. Not cruel. Terrified. Claire stared at him in surprise. Adrian knelt in front of her again, more carefully this time. You are not worrying about money right now. Claire swallowed hard. You cannot keep fixing everything. Adrian looked directly into her eyes. Watch me. The words hit even harder this time, because he looked completely serious. Another cramp rolled painfully through her stomach. Claire inhaled sharply and grabbed the edge of the sofa cushion. Adrian's entire face changed instantly. Fear flickered there before control buried it again. Look at me, he said quietly. Claire forced herself to. Adrian reached carefully for her hand. Warm. Steady. You and the baby are the priority now. Something in his voice nearly broke her composure completely. Nobody had ever included her and the baby together like that before. Not as something worth protecting. Evelyn returned quickly. Dr. Mercer is preparing a private room at St. Vincent's. Adrian nodded once before helping Claire carefully to her feet. The moment she stood, dizziness hit hard enough that the room tilted sideways briefly. Adrian caught her instantly before she could stumble. One arm wrapped securely around her waist. Protective. Certain. Claire grabbed his sleeve reflexively while trying to steady herself. Adrian looked down at her with visible alarm now. We are leaving. Claire looked toward the glass office walls where Manhattan stretched endlessly beneath dark storm clouds. Somewhere downstairs, reporters waited to tear her apart publicly before sunset. But Adrian did not look remotely concerned about headlines anymore. He only looked at her like losing control of this situation terrified him for the first time all day. And somehow that frightened Claire even more. The private underground garage beneath Ashford Global was already surrounded by security when Adrian guided Claire toward the waiting SUV. Men in dark suits stood near the elevator speaking urgently into earpieces while camera flashes exploded somewhere beyond the concrete entrance ramp above. Claire instinctively shrank closer to Adrian as another sharp cramp tightened across her stomach. Adrian felt it immediately through the way her body stiffened beside him. His arm tightened protectively around her waist. Easy, he said quietly. We are almost there. Claire hated how weak she suddenly felt. The entire morning had blurred into panic, humiliation, and exhaustion until even standing upright seemed difficult now. Adrian opened the SUV door himself and helped her inside carefully before sliding in beside her moments later. Go, he instructed the driver sharply. The vehicle pulled away instantly. Claire leaned her head back against the leather seat and closed her eyes briefly while trying to steady her breathing. Adrian watched her the entire time. How far apart are the contractions? I do not know. Claire. She opened her eyes tiredly. I stopped timing them after the restaurant fired me. Anger flashed briefly across Adrian's face again before disappearing beneath control. You should have called someone. Claire laughed softly without humor. Who? Silence followed. Because they both knew she had nobody. Adrian looked away toward the rain-dark tunnel outside the windows. Something inside his chest tightened painfully at that realization. A pregnant woman should never have to face fear this alone. Yet Claire had been doing exactly that for months before he walked into a pharmacy at midnight. His phone buzzed again. Adrian ignored it completely this time. Another contraction rolled through Claire suddenly, stronger now. She inhaled sharply and grabbed the edge of the seat beside her. Adrian moved instantly closer. Look at me. Claire tried. Breathe slowly. His voice remained low and steady despite the tension hardening every line of his body. Claire focused on him while the pain slowly eased again. I am sorry, she whispered weakly afterward. Adrian frowned immediately. For what? This entire disaster. Claire. His voice sharpened slightly. Stop apologizing for needing help. Her eyes filled instantly. She turned toward the rain-streaked window before he could see tears threatening again. Adrian noticed anyway. Of course he did. 20 minutes later, the SUV pulled into the private emergency entrance at St. Vincent's Medical Center. Security guards already waited beside the doors while several nurses hurried forward with a wheelchair. Claire's embarrassment returned instantly. I can walk. Adrian ignored her completely. Use the wheelchair. Adrian. Now. The authority in his voice left no room for argument. Claire lowered herself reluctantly into the chair while nurses rushed her through private hallways away from public waiting rooms and cameras. Everything moved too fast after that. Monitors. Questions. Blood pressure cuffs tightening around her arm. A fetal heartbeat echoing steadily through the examination room. Adrian remained beside the hospital bed through all of it without once looking at his phone. Dear. Mercer, a calm woman in her 50s with silver blonde hair, finished reviewing the monitor before turning toward them. The baby's heartbeat is stable. Claire released a shaky breath immediately. Adrian's shoulders loosened slightly beside her. But, Dr. Mercer continued carefully, you are showing signs of stress-induced contractions and exhaustion. Claire looked down quietly. I told you, Adrian muttered under his breath. Dr. Mercer's expression softened as she studied Claire more carefully. How long have you been under this level of stress? Claire almost laughed at the impossible question. A while. Are you sleeping? Silence. Eating properly? More silence. Dr. Mercer exchanged one brief look with Adrian before continuing gently. Claire, your body is trying to keep up with a pregnancy under very difficult conditions. Shame burned hot across Claire's face again. Adrian stepped closer to the bed immediately. What does she need? Dr. Mercer looked directly at him. Rest. Stability. Reduce stress. Her eyes shifted briefly toward the television mounted near the corner of the room where muted entertainment headlines already flashed Adrian's photograph beside Claire's. And ideally fewer media attacks. Adrian's expression darkened instantly. Handled. Dr. Mercer gave him a skeptical look that suggested she had known him a long time. See that you do. After she left, silence settled softly across the private hospital room. Rain tapped gently against the windows overlooking Manhattan while monitors beeped steadily beside the bed. Claire stared down at the thin hospital blanket covering her legs. This is insane. Adrian sat down quietly in the chair beside her bed. Probably. Yesterday morning you did not even know I existed. Adrian looked at her carefully. And today? Claire asked softly. Adrian held her gaze for several seconds before answering. Today I know you skip meals so your baby can eat. Claire's throat tightened instantly. Adrian continued quietly. I know you work until your feet swell because you are terrified of losing stability. His eyes dropped briefly toward her stomach. And I know you still apologize every time someone hurts you. Claire looked away quickly before emotion overwhelmed her completely. Adrian leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms against his knees while watching her carefully. Claire. She forced herself to meet his eyes again. You should not have survived all of this alone. The tenderness in his voice nearly shattered what little composure she had left. Before she could answer, A sharp knock sounded against the hospital door. Adrian's expression hardened immediately. What? Evelyn stepped inside looking visibly uneasy. I am sorry, but there is something you need to see. She handed Adrian a tablet silently. Adrian's face went completely cold while reading whatever appeared on the screen. Claire's stomach tightened nervously. What happened? Adrian said nothing for several terrible seconds. Then he slowly handed the tablet toward her. Claire looked down. Her breath stopped instantly. Tyler Morgan stood smiling beside reporters outside Ashford Global Headquarters, beneath bold headlines already spreading across every major news site. Ex-fiancé of pregnant woman breaks silence. Claire's hands began shaking immediately as she read the quote beneath the photograph. I warned Adrian Ashford that Claire has always been obsessed with wealthy men. The hospital room suddenly felt ice cold. Adrian looked at her trembling face. Then something inside him finally snapped completely. He stood slowly from the chair beside her bed. Calm. Silent. Terrifying. Enough, he said quietly. And for the first time since meeting him, Claire realized Adrian Ashford was no longer trying to protect only her feelings. He was preparing for war. Claire had never seen silence feel dangerous before. Yet the moment Adrian said enough, the entire hospital room changed around him. He stood near the window overlooking rain-soaked Manhattan with one hand resting loosely at his side while the tablet screen still glowed beside him with Tyler's smiling interview photograph. Calm. Completely calm. That frightened Claire far more than anger would have. Evelyn remained near the door, visibly tense. The interview aired 15 minutes ago, she explained carefully. Every major outlet picked it up immediately. Adrian's eyes never left the screen. Pull every article connected to false allegations. Legal is already trying. Trying is not the same as succeeding. His voice remained low and controlled. Claire slowly lowered the tablet onto the hospital bed beside her. Shame and exhaustion twisted painfully together inside her chest. Tyler knew exactly how to hurt her. He always had. Adrian turned toward Evelyn again. Find out who arranged the interview. Evelyn hesitated briefly. We believe Vanessa Bennett coordinated it through one of the entertainment networks. Claire closed her eyes instantly. Of course Vanessa was involved. Tyler's wealthy socialite sister had hated Claire from the beginning. Not loudly at first. Quietly. Politely. The kind of cruelty that smiled while cutting people apart. Handle it, Adrian said coldly. Evelyn nodded once before leaving the room quickly. Silence settled again after the door closed. Claire stared down at the hospital blanket covering her legs while tears threatened painfully behind her eyes. I am sorry. Adrian looked at her sharply. Do not say that again. But this keeps getting worse because of me. Adrian crossed the room toward her slowly. No. It keeps getting worse because people think they can humiliate you without consequences. Claire let out a shaky breath. Maybe Tyler is right. Adrian stopped instantly. No. You barely know me. I know enough. Claire looked away. You do not know what people are saying online. Adrian's expression hardened. I do not care. But your company does. My company can survive gossip. He stepped closer to the hospital bed. What I will not tolerate is people attacking a pregnant woman to entertain themselves. Claire's throat tightened painfully. Adrian sat down carefully beside the bed this time instead of the chair. Close enough that she could feel warmth radiating from him. Look at me, he said quietly. Claire forced herself to. Adrian's blue eyes held hers steadily. You are not what they are calling you. Her composure cracked instantly after that. Claire covered her face with trembling hands as tears finally spilled over. Months of fear and exhaustion crashed through her all at once. Losing Tyler. Losing stability. Losing work. Watching strangers tear her apart online while carrying a baby she was desperately trying to protect alone. Adrian did not speak immediately. He simply moved closer and wrapped one strong arm carefully around her shoulders. Protective. Certain. Claire froze for one startled second before the exhaustion inside her finally gave out completely. She leaned into him without meaning to. Adrian held her gently while she cried against the front of his dress shirt. No judgment. No impatience. Just quiet presence. I never wanted this, Claire whispered brokenly. I never wanted anyone to think I was trapping people. Adrian's hand moved slowly against her back. I know. I never asked Tyler for money after he left. I know. I sold my engagement ring to cover medical bills. Adrian's entire body went still beside her. Claire pulled back slightly, wiping at her tears in embarrassment. His mother got sick 3 months after he left me. Insurance would not cover part of the treatment. Adrian stared at her in disbelief. You paid for his mother's care? Claire looked down quietly. She was kind to me once. Something dangerous moved behind Adrian's eyes then. Not anger at Claire. Something far deeper. Did Tyler know? Claire nodded faintly. He said I was trying to manipulate his family into forgiving me. The silence that followed felt sharp enough to cut through glass. Adrian looked away briefly, jaw tightening so hard Claire could see the muscle move beneath his skin. Unbelievable. Claire laughed weakly through remaining tears. I think I just have terrible taste in men. Adrian looked back at her immediately. No, his voice softened slightly. You just spent too long giving your loyalty to people who never deserved it. The words hit her straight in the chest. Before Claire could answer, the television mounted across the hospital room suddenly changed broadcasts automatically. A female news anchor appeared beneath bright studio lights. Breaking news. Adrian Ashford to address media live. Claire's stomach dropped instantly. Adrian looked toward the screen without surprise. What is that? She whispered. Adrian stood slowly from the bed. Calm again now. Focused. Damage control. Claire's eyes widened. Adrian. No, his tone softened immediately when he saw panic cross her face. Not for me. He picked up his suit jacket from the nearby chair and slid it on carefully. For you. Claire stared at him in confusion. What are you talking about? Adrian adjusted the cuffs of his shirt with slow precision before answering. My board wants distance. His gaze lifted toward hers steadily. The media wants scandal. Claire's chest tightened uneasily. And what do you want? Adrian walked toward her slowly until he stood directly beside the hospital bed again. Then he reached down and gently brushed one strand of hair back from her tear-stained face. The gesture felt impossibly intimate. I want this to stop hurting you. Claire's breath caught softly. Adrian held her gaze for one long quiet second before speaking again. Stay here with Dr. Mercer. Where are you going? Adrian's expression became calm steel once more. To remind the world that nobody gets to destroy you publicly while I stand there and watch. Claire stared at him speechlessly as he turned toward the hospital room door. Then suddenly panic overtook her again. Adrian. He stopped immediately and looked back. Claire's fingers tightened around the blanket nervously. If you do this, she whispered softly, everything changes. Adrian looked at her for several seconds. Rain rolled down the hospital windows behind him while Manhattan glowed beneath storm clouds outside. Then he answered with terrifying certainty. It already did. 3 hours later, every television screen in America carried the same live broadcast. Adrian Ashford stood behind a polished podium inside the main press hall of Ashford Global, while camera flashes exploded nonstop across the room. Reporters packed shoulder to shoulder beneath glaring studio lights. Financial analysts. Entertainment media. Gossip bloggers. Everyone waited for scandal. Adrian gave them silence instead. Calm. Cold. Untouchable. Claire watched from the hospital bed with trembling hands wrapped around a cup of untouched tea, while Dr. Mercer pretended not to monitor the television from across the room. The news banner beneath Adrian's face read live statement from Adrian Ashford. One reporter shouted immediately. Mr. Ashford, is the pregnant woman linked to you romantically? Adrian did not even blink. Claire Hartwell is a private citizen who has been harassed publicly for 48 hours. Another reporter jumped in quickly. So the relationship rumors are false? Adrian rested one hand lightly against the podium. What is false are the attacks against her character. Camera flashes intensified wildly. Claire's heartbeat thundered painfully inside her chest. Adrian continued calmly. A woman struggling through pregnancy alone should not become entertainment because she accepted help during a difficult moment. A third reporter raised his voice. Did she manipulate the situation to gain access to you? The entire room changed instantly. Not loudly. Worse. Adrian became still. Terrifyingly still. No. he said quietly. The silence after that single word spread through the press hall like ice. Adrian's blue eyes swept slowly across the room. Claire Hartwell asked me for help because she was frightened and publicly humiliated. His voice sharpened slightly. Any person with decency would have helped her. Claire's throat tightened instantly, watching him defend her in front of the entire world without hesitation. Another reporter stood. What about claims from her former fiancé that she targets wealthy men? Adrian's expression finally hardened visibly. Tyler Morgan abandoned a pregnant woman and then sold her pain to the media for attention. The room exploded into shouting questions immediately afterward. Adrian ignored every one of them. Meanwhile, he continued coldly, Claire Hartwell worked multiple jobs while pregnant, skipped meals to pay medical bills, and continued protecting the reputation of people who never deserved her loyalty. Claire covered her mouth instantly as tears filled her eyes again. How did he know all of that mattered? Why did he sound angrier for her suffering than she ever allowed herself to be? Another reporter raised her voice over the chaos. Mr. Ashford, are you saying you are involved with her personally? Adrian looked directly toward the cameras then. Calm, certain, powerful enough that the entire room slowly quieted again. I am saying this. His voice lowered. Anyone attacking Claire Hartwell from this moment forward is attacking someone under my protection. The press hall went dead silent. Even Dr. Mercer stopped moving across the hospital room. Adrian continued without breaking eye contact with the cameras. And I do not tolerate cruelty toward women who have already suffered enough. Claire's tears spilled over completely now. Not because of the headlines. Not because of the cameras. Because nobody had ever chosen her publicly before. Nobody had ever stood in front of the world and made it clear she was worth defending. Questions erupted again immediately after the statement ended. Adrian ignored all of them and stepped away from the podium while security moved quickly around him. The live broadcast cut back to stunned news anchors seconds later. Claire stared silently at the television long after the screen changed. Her chest hurt in the strangest way now. Not fear. Something softer. More dangerous. Dr. Mercer finally exhaled quietly from across the room. Well, she muttered. That was certainly not subtle. Claire laughed weakly through tears. No, her phone began vibrating wildly beside the hospital bed almost instantly afterward. Messages flooded the screen faster than she could process them. Some cruel. Some supportive now. Social media clips of Adrian's statement already spreading everywhere online. One headline appeared across the television again. Adrian Ashford publicly defends pregnant woman during live press conference. Another read Billionaire CEO declares protection of Claire Hartwell. Claire set the phone down quickly before the attention overwhelmed her again. 30 minutes later, the hospital room door opened quietly. Adrian stepped inside still wearing the same dark suit from the press conference. Exhaustion lined his face now beneath the polished control. Yet the moment he saw Claire sitting safely in the hospital bed, something in his expression softened immediately. How are the contractions? He asked quietly. Claire looked at him for several seconds before answering. Better. Adrian nodded once and loosened his tie slowly. The room fell silent around them. Rain still drifted softly against the windows overlooking Manhattan, while evening lights glowed across the city below. Claire finally found her voice first. You did not have to do that. Adrian walked toward the bed carefully. Yes, he said simply. I did. Claire shook her head faintly. Your board probably hates me now. My board fears losing control. He stopped beside the hospital bed. That is not the same thing. Claire looked down at her hands quietly. You changed everything today. Adrian studied her face for a long moment before answering softly. You changed it first. Claire looked back up slowly. Adrian reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and placed something gently onto the blanket beside her. Claire stared down in confusion. The tiny silver screw from the unfinished crib in apartment 3B rested in his palm. Her breath caught instantly. You took that. Adrian nodded once. I figured I should finish what I started. Emotion crashed through her so suddenly she could barely breathe around it. Adrian sat carefully beside her on the edge of the hospital bed, close enough that she could feel warmth radiating from him again. Claire. His voice softened further. You asked me to pretend to be your husband for 1 minute. Her eyes filled instantly. Adrian's gaze held hers steadily, completely unguarded now. I think somewhere along the way, he admitted quietly, I forgot we were pretending. Silence wrapped around them. Heavy, beautiful, real. Claire stared at him while tears slipped silently down her face. Adrian lifted one hand slowly and brushed them away with impossible gentleness. You are not alone anymore, he whispered. At that exact moment, the baby kicked sharply beneath Claire's stomach again. Adrian froze in surprise before letting out the quietest laugh she had ever heard from him. Claire laughed too through her tears. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, the future no longer felt terrifying. Because somehow, between a midnight pharmacy and a storm over Manhattan, the most powerful man in the city had stopped seeing her as someone temporary. He had started seeing her as home.